This is the first of 3 podcast episodes covering intimate subjects that may not be suitable for everyone, so be aware. We're going to have some frank conversation about sex. Not primarily the sex that happens in affairs, but the way sex has shaped your personal story and how it's experienced in your relationships. In this first episode, we're talking about sexual shame. My guest is Jocelyn Silva, a coach and therapist who guides clients towards letting go of shame, embracing healthy sexuality, and stepping into a more authentic, whole version of themselves. Jocelyn will share links to her resources later on, and you'll find them in the episode notes too. I also want to recommend a resource for those of you who, like me, grew up in a purity culture that used shame as a guard against any form of sexual curiosity or expression. The Great Sex Rescue is a book written by a group of authors who remain committed to their evangelical faith but push back hard against much of the church's teaching about sex and relationships. I've put the book information in the episode notes, and I encourage you to check it out if you're at all curious. We'll start this episode by hearing Jocelyn's story about how she experienced sexual shame. Later, I'll tell you how it showed up in my childhood. I'm Tim Tedder. This is episode 66 of the Affair Recovery Room.
Welcome to The Recovery Room, a podcast presented by affairhealing.com.
In this healing place, in this healing place.
So I was born and raised in Los Angeles. My mom is from El Salvador. My dad's from Mexico, so I'm first generation. And I was raised in a Spanish-speaking, very conservative Catholic household. I went to Catholic school from kindergarten to 12th grade. I wanted to be a nun when I was 16. I was an altar server. I was a lector. I was very involved in my church. I was very, very religious. And I've also just been a very sexual person. And so I experienced just a lot of shame around my sexual curiosities and my sexual thoughts and just who I was as a sexual person. And it got to the point where when I was in high school, I had a boyfriend and he wanted to be a priest and I wanted to be a nun. It was really weird. And we used to say, okay, we're going to do like naughty things, but in order to be good with God, like we're going to pray a rosary. We have to make sure we go to confession this week. Like it was like a whole weird thing. I just grew up with a lot of shame around my sexuality and then thinking it was like a bad thing that I was going to go to hell. And that was like my biggest fear. And then when I turned 18, I had sex for the first time. The skies parted, the angels sang. I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. Like who the hell said sex is bad? I had sex for the first time with my boyfriend, who is a loving, caring, wonderful person. And it was so beautiful to explore my sexuality with him. But then, of course, I developed a really big resentment and anger towards the church, who told me that my sexuality is something to be ashamed of. And so I became an atheist. And from then on, the pendulum just swung from one extreme to the other, where instead of being uber conservative, I became incredibly reckless with my body. And I just use my sexuality, just the validation that I'm lovable, right? That I'm worthy and deserving of love and all of those things. So when I turned 20, I became a sex educator because I was I really wanted to support other people in becoming more sexually empowered. But then throughout my 20s, even though I was getting my bachelor's degree in gender and women's studies with the ultimate goal of becoming a therapist, and I got my master's in social work. And even though I was doing all of that in my secret life, I was also cheating on my partners, and sex almost became kind of like an obsession for me. You know, it was like I had been deprived of it for such a long time that no one taught me how to have these really healthy sexual relationships. And so it manifested into me not knowing how to develop true intimacy, right, with myself and another person, because intimacy and sex are two different things, right? I was having a lot of sex, but I wasn't having a lot of intimacy. And so everything came to a head when I got married when I was 26. And within 6 months of marriage, I was cheating on my spouse. I got caught and wanted to die. I hated myself. I felt like a monster. And a professor recommended that I go to Sex and Love Addicts Anonymous. And that program saved my life. So I worked the steps for 3 years and got divorced from my partner. That was 2018. So coming up on almost 9 years now since all of that happened. And for the last 8 years, 9 years of my life, I have dedicated myself to being a person of integrity, to really learning what true intimacy is. And that's the work that I do with my clients now. So I think that's like the short, long version of my story.
When you were going through doing the program and doing the steps, what was it about yourself that finally made sense to you?
You know, if anyone joins a 12-step program, you don't do it because your life is rainbows and unicorns. 12-step program is usually when people have hit rock bottom and they're like, okay, something needs to change. That doesn't happen to everybody, right? But it was definitely my case. I had hit rock bottom and we call it the gift of desperation. I had the gift of desperation. I'm like, clearly how I'm living my life is not working because I literally just like burnt my life to the ground. So something needs to change, right? And I think the biggest thing that struck me about the program was the spiritual element of it. Because at that time, I was still very much an atheist. I was still very angry with God. I was angry with the church, but I also really missed my relationship with God. I really missed my spiritual life. And so I remember just like what they would say is you choose the higher power that resonates with you. If you want to believe in a higher power that celebrates your sexuality, like that can be your higher power, right? So I had the gift of desperation that I knew that something needed to change. And then I also was intrigued by the spiritual element of it that was not defined by a church in this like rigid idea of what quote unquote God is, right? So yeah, I don't know if that answered your question.
Let me go backwards because I grew up in an evangelical church, but also very strict when it came to sexuality, very clearly defined boundaries. The message was sex is a wonderful thing because God made it. But the message you got was it really didn't turn good until you got married, and somehow between now and when you get married to somebody, it's just forbidden. It's something you don't do. And I lived in a culture where there's just a lot of shame around anything that had to do with sex. Every guy just thought God must be judging them because they masturbated again. And it was just a common type of thing. And you couldn't admit it. You really couldn't talk about it. It was just shame covered it all. Your story is one in which once you experience sex, it was like, oh, this is a wonderful, good thing. I want to explore it. And it kind of swung the other way. Affairs, all the things that sometimes when we react to something, we take a very opposite perspective. My journey was a little bit different. I was so burdened by the shame of everything that I just kept everything inward. If there was any temptation to do anything that was outside the realm of acceptability, I either had to be secretive about it or avoid it. And so by the time, I'm in a relationship and eventually married where, in my view, yay, now we get to have sex all the time. Of course, my wife's going to want that too. And it didn't exactly work out that way, but I didn't know how to talk about it. I mean, the shame was something that just buried that all down deep inside. Of course, it became a problem in the marriage. Not a problem that, we had 5 kids, so we figured out how to do that, but it wasn't something we could talk about comfortably. I never knew how to have the kind of open conversations to really understand what she needed and wanted. I was just aware of like, I'm not happy with this. So it almost went the other way. I just became more closed and closed and closed until, one day I decided, hey, why shouldn't I experience more openness? And, I had an affair. I didn't do it just to have sex, but that was definitely a release. So my infidelity, probably a lot of it came from that suppressed shame and everything that kept things inside. My inauthenticity is I just kept it all in there and never talked about it and became critical and became, upset about things. And then when I had an affair, it became a context in which, there's an openness and freedom here that I haven't experienced before. Different kind of shame, but it was a lot of exploration. Your infidelity, what drove that for you? Because it wasn't the same for you.
Well, actually, it's so interesting. I'm listening to you talk, and I'm gonna go as far, I'm gonna say it is the same.
Hmm.
Because I said there's a difference between sex and intimacy,
Yes.
right?
Hmm.
So like, let's talk about shame for a second. Like, let's understand what shame is. I want to be very clear that shame in itself is not wrong, right? Like, there are some things that we should feel ashamed of. If we lie, if we steal, if we kill somebody, if we cheat, please feel ashamed of yourself, right? Like, there is a place for shame in this world.
Mhm.
Your sexual expression, if it's something that is done between consenting adults, is nothing to be ashamed of, right? And what is shame? Shame is the feeling of I am wrong, right? Based on Brene Brown's definition, which I love.
Yeah.
So Brene Brown says guilt is I did something wrong. Shame is I am wrong. There's something wrong with me. So when you're made to feel ashamed about your sexual expression, you say that you closed yourself off and I went the other way, but everything that I was doing was still shameful in the sense where I was cheating on people. I wasn't being honest. I was having sex for validation. I was using people as trophies, right? And that's like addictive behavior when you are almost like fiending for the next hit because that's the only thing that's filling your soul, right? Or like what we call like the God-shaped hole inside of you, right? So the reason why I say that it was the same thing for both of us was because I still wasn't really talking about my sexual desires in a healthy manner. I was still hiding. Shame thrives in secrecy. I was still hiding. I was still living a double life. I was still doing all of these things that people didn't know that I was doing behind closed doors because I didn't have the tools to speak about it openly and honestly. I wasn't truly developing trust and intimacy with my partners. I was having a lot of sex. I was saying a lot of fluffy things, right? But I wasn't being truly authentic. So I used to say communication is my number one sex tip. I don't say that anymore. I say relentless authenticity is my number one sex tip because at the end of the day, your relationship with your sexuality is between you and you. Your partner is an extension of that, but it's really with you and you. And the more authentic and in integrity you can be, the more intimacy you can develop.
Yeah. And so that's what was the same between you and me. We did not know how to be authentic. We did not know how to be vulnerable and open in that way because we never learned that. It was something that you were supposed to keep a lid on. So it became this deeper secret thing. It just took different expressions in your choices and mine, but it was the same problem.
It was the same exact problem. Yeah. And the shame still thrived. I think it healed my shame of my sexual expression, but did not teach me how to develop true, honest, intimate relationships with myself and others. And that was the journey that I had to go on. Went from being ashamed of being sexual to being ashamed of being a liar and a cheater.
This story of family of origin issues in which sex is just not talked about, it's a very common thing. And to see the consequence of that is pretty obvious too. If anybody's listening to this who has young children, man, just finding ways to interject the conversations early on. Okay, so it's awkward or whatever. Figure out, you've got all kinds of resources now to help parents talk to their kids, honestly, openly, and in healthy ways about sex. Because if you don't, their curiosity is going to take them to all kinds of places. Some of it may be healthy. A lot of it probably isn't because they have access through technology to a lot of stuff that is not going to give them a healthy perspective of sex.
My professional opinion is to start talking about sex to your children from the time that they're verbal, not the act of sex, but teaching children the proper terminology, vulva, penis, right? As they get older so that they understand the changes that are happening with their bodies, right? When they start to go through puberty, talk about like what kissing is, what sex is, what can happen, right? How to protect yourself, the risks, right? Like keeping yourself open so that they know that they can come to you if they have any questions or any of that.
If you could go back and talk to that younger version of yourself, what kind of messages would you want to say to her?
If I could go back to speak to my younger self, I would give her really two big messages. One would be the universe loves you, and you can 100% develop a relationship with God that has nothing to do with Catholicism. And being your spirituality is beautiful, right? That's something that I think I would have loved to have developed at a younger age. Although I am really grateful for my spiritual journey. I'm really proud of it and where I am now. But I really did miss a spiritual guidance when I left the church. I had none. I was just raw dogging life, no moral compass at that point. And the second thing I would say to myself is learn how to sit in the discomfort of someone else's disappointment. It is far better to have an open and honest conversation with somebody that you love about how you genuinely feel and hurt their feelings than to lie to them to protect their feelings. Lying will always lead to disconnection and a lack of trust. But if you can be honest, even if you're going to hurt the other person's feelings, that will always develop trust. And that will always be a better option than to lie and be deceitful.
Are there any incidences when you were, very young where the opposite messages were formed in you? Or we don't talk about these things, or you better say what they want to hear so that you don't disappoint them?
Well, this is exactly what I wanted to talk about this right here, right? Because when we experience sexual shame growing up, whether because of purity culture or because of your family or the church, whatever, the message that you're receiving is who you are is not okay. Because sexual urges are very natural in us as humans, right? Like we have sexual urges. We cannot control those. Those are normal. They're natural. They just happen to us. So when you receive the message, sex is bad, your sexual urges are bad, you're receiving the message that you are bad. And something that I really had to navigate growing up was like, I lied a lot because I received the message that who I am, if I tell the truth, I'm not going to be loved and accepted for it. My mom and I have done a lot of work in our relationship, and now we're in a good place. But growing up, I received the message from my mom that like, if I tell her the truth about who I am, what my curiosities are, what I'm actually thinking, what my doubts are, like I'm just going to be shamed for it. I'm going to be rejected for it. So when I received the message, I am wrong, I just learned I have to lie to make people happy. I have to pretend to be someone that I'm not so that I'm loved, right? Because if I'm honest, I'm not going to be loved. I'm going to be rejected. I'm going to be pushed to the side. I'm not going to be accepted. So receiving those messages, it was lying just became natural for me. It became common. It became something I didn't even think about. It's something I had to do so that I wouldn't sit through an uncomfortable situation or be judged, criticized by people in my life. So just learning how to like be honest. And if you like it, cool. And if not, then it doesn't matter. Because at the end of the day, my relationship with myself and God, right, are the most important relationships in my life.
I remember the moment when shame fell like a hammer on my own sense of sexuality. It was when I was in grade school, before puberty, and I really didn't even have any sense of sex. I just remember I was out in the neighborhood. We went over to a school with some friends of mine, and we were just playing on the playground at this nearby school, and I was swinging on the monkey bars, and all of a sudden I got this tingle between my legs that felt really good, And I don't have any sense of feeling bad about it. In fact, I'm telling my friends, say, hey, if you do this, does you? And they're going, I don't know what you're talking about. I go, I don't know, but it feels really good. I'm just a little kid. I go home and go, I got to figure out how to make this happen again. So I'm in my room trying to figure out how do I manipulate this to make that happen. And my mom walks in. And immediately there's this look of horror on her face. And I forget what she said, but it was actually, shutting down everything, slammed the door, and nothing was talked about that again. I think she came and eventually gave me some ridiculous, I wish I still had a copy of this book, because this book just made all these weird claims about sex and masturbation and all this sort of stuff. But, that was the extent of the conversation. All I knew is like, oh, well, that's something, if I'm ever going to explore it, which I did, I've got to hide it. I can never let anybody know about that. And so, I mean, everything in my sexuality went underground. I'm not saying that that caused me to have an affair. I am saying that it got in the way of healthy intimacy in my marriage because neither of us understood how to really talk about it. We couldn't be open, authentic in that area. And it also meant that when I opened that door to another relationship, that part of the curiosity and exploration that I'd never felt free to explore before, like, okay, well, now I'm breaking the rules anyway, so I'm just going to go for it. And it was an added component to my being very much at risk. And by the way, I've talked to a lot of people that grew up very similar things, like a lot of guilt and shame behind it. They've never felt free to talk about it in their marriage or work things out in a healthy way. And so this great exploration in a forbidden relationship becomes exciting and wonderful.
By the way, I love what you said. And I just want to like piggyback off of that and say like 100%. I'm not saying that the shame that I grew up with is what caused the infidelity that I did later in life. What I'm saying is like the shame that I felt around my sexuality did not set me up to learn how to speak truth in relationships and build intimacy in that way, right? Mm-hmm. It actually did the opposite, where I was like, oh, I learned that if I'm ashamed of something, I need to hide it. I need to do it behind people's back. Okay, so I need to do this thing behind people's back and not talk about it because sitting in the discomfort of someone's, sadness, disappointment, anger was too much. So let me just do this thing that you don't know about and we're all going to be happy. My life blew up. I hit rock bottom. When my spouse caught me cheating, it was an awful time for me. Like I got into a depression. I was put into a 5150 for suicidal watch. Like I hated myself. I didn't want to live. And so when I got into program and started working through the steps of the program, I realized that I was cheating because I had no spiritual guidance. In a lot of ways, sex and other people became my higher power. That was the only thing that was giving me fulfillment. And I could never get enough of it. I wanted more. I wanted more. I wanted more. Right. And I betrayed myself a lot to get that. Like, let me keep everyone around me happy. I'm going to have my cake and eat it too. I'm going to do what I need to do so that I'm okay. Because if not, I'm going to fall apart because I have nothing to sustain me. So when I got into program, I learned, well, what does my life look like if I didn't have sex and love? What would my life look like if I was a person of integrity and I spoke my truth and I was honest with myself and others? And that was scary because doing that meant I needed to confront a lot of, again, uncomfortable situations. I think in a lot of ways I was an avoidant, when I was cheating. I was avoiding hard conversations. I was avoiding disappointing others. I was avoiding my true desires so that everyone around me could be happy. And now I've really learned that all the magic and the gifts are in those uncomfortable situations, are in sitting in the discomfort of someone's disappointment, of being honest, even if it's going to hurt another person's feelings. Because like I said, at the end of the day, that will always build trust. People can trust me if I tell you, hey, I don't like how you look in that outfit. You're probably going to trust me a lot more because I'm keeping it real with you, right? Than if I just always tell you look amazing. So really, I think what it was for me is like, I want to be able to put my head on the pillow every night and love the way that I feel about myself because I know that in my heart, I'm being honest with myself and other people.
See, I think this is interesting to me because I do believe that inauthenticity is at the core of the problems that often result in behaviors like infidelity. I'm not saying infidelity itself, certainly that's being deceptive and inauthentic, but I'm talking about a lifestyle of inauthenticity creates a context in which I think infidelity is much more easily born. And I see that in a lot of clients. Mm-hmm. And so making that connection like, oh, being inauthentic really demonstrates itself in these unhealthy ways, including lying, betraying the promises I made, using sex. It goes beyond just saying, oops, I did a bad thing. Sorry. I don't ever want to do that again. It's realizing, oh, I've got a problem that was kind of filling a hole that I need to pay attention. Why is that hole there? learning how to be me, learning how to be real, learning how to say the things that are hard to say because they're honest and true, learning how to be authentic, I guess, in a sense, is a guard against repeating all those unhealthy behaviors over and over again.
I mean, I don't lie anymore. I do not lie. I speak the truth to a fault. Like right now, I mean, you can see me, people can't see me. I got a haircut yesterday. I'm going to be honest, I fucking hate my haircut. I don't like my hair. And when the lady asked me, what do you think? I said, I hate it.
Huh.
I said, I didn't want it to be this short. I told you I didn't want it to be this. She cut a little too much off.
Mm-hmm.
And it was uncomfortable. It was. So there was a moment of discomfort. She probably felt bad, but I'm like, I'm not going to lie. I do not lie, because the moment I lie, that's when all hell breaks loose. And I think that this is true for everyone. Like, if we can learn how to be fully authentic with ourselves and other people, the more authentic that you can be, the more you're going to develop trust, the more intimacy you're going to experience, the more joy and peace you're going to experience. The amount of peace I have in my life now because I have no skeletons in my closet is phenomenal.
You talked about authenticity being the key to a healthy intimacy and even sexuality.
100%. Let's talk about what intimacy is, right? So sex is the act of sex, which, by the way, I mean, not necessarily. Sex exists in your mind. Sex can literally be whatever you want it to be, right? It doesn't really have a real definition. Everyone can define what sex is. Typically, we use our bodies, right? Or our energies to engage in like sexual activities with ourselves and others. But intimacy is when you develop safety and connection through vulnerability with another person or with yourself. First with yourself, then with another person. And you cannot develop intimacy without integrity. I'm going to say that again. You cannot develop intimacy without integrity. You need integrity to develop intimacy. So there's this book called The Big Leap by Gay Hendricks. Phenomenal book. If you haven't read it, it's so good. And one thing that really struck me about this book is how he defines integrity from a physics standpoint. Because when we hear the word integrity, we usually think of like honesty, morality, right? Transparency, very like from a moral standpoint. But he defines integrity from a physics standpoint. And he says, integrity from a physics standpoint is when something is in integrity, when an object is in integrity, it is whole and complete. And energy can only move through objects that are in integrity. So when you think about energetics, right? So for example, you and I are having a conversation, we're flowing, we're on the same wavelength. I'm giving you messages, you're giving me messages, right? We're here together. If I were to lie to you right now, even if you didn't know I was lying, whenever we're out of integrity, it's like putting a pebble in a hose. It blocks energy flow. And now there can no longer be an energetic flow between us. This is why sometimes when people say, I have a feeling that my partner is lying to me, I have a feeling that there's an affair happening, even though there might not be any like real signs, right? But there's that feeling because they can feel the energetic block, because energetically you're stifling the flow. So when we are in integrity, that is how we can move energy between us and other individuals. And you can feel it. You can feel the safety in your body. Your nervous system is relaxed. You're calm. You feel safe. You feel like you can trust the other person. You feel like you can trust yourself. So in order for us to develop intimacy with someone, we have to be honest. Because trust is about honesty. It's not about making the other person happy. It's not about making yourself happy, although you will experience more joy and peace when you're in your integrity, even if that leads to rupture. Authenticity and integrity is like biting into a bitter fruit with a sweet aftertaste. It might create rupture. It might suck. Someone's feelings might get hurt, right? It might create distance or disappointment. All those things. But at the end of the day, you're going to feel this inner peace that, oh, I was honest. I spoke my truth. I said what I needed to say. It was really hard, but I did it. And that's always going to lead to trust, again, even if you don't like what the other person is saying. So really the journey here is one, learning how to be a person of integrity, speak truth. I would say, we're not perfect. At least 95% of the time, right? If you can just be honest, 95% of the time,
Making the effort.
you know, making it like 99% of the time would be great, right? But like we're humans, right? So just making the effort of being truthful, and then learning how to be honest in a way that's tactful, in a way that's kind, in a way that's open, in a way that's loving. And that's the part that people get really stuck on, because it's like, oh, I don't want to hurt the other person's feelings, so I'd rather lie. It's like, no, learn how to be honest in a way that is in the kindest way that you can, right? So that the other person can receive it in the best way possible. So like learning how to say I statements, like I feel really upset at this, or I actually don't like this, or, whatever it may be. And then navigating those conversations, right? That's what leads to intimacy. And also what leads to a stronger relationship isn't about avoiding rupture. It's about how well can we get at the repair after a rupture. But you can only repair after a rupture if both people are being honest with themselves and each other in that moment. And that requires a lot of work around sitting in the discomfort of someone else's hard feelings, right?
Yeah.
And learning how to sit in your own. But that's the journey that I take a lot of my clients through. That's the journey that I went through. I'm very passionate about it because the life I have now, the peace that I feel now, I would never trade it for anything. And unfortunately, I had to learn it the hard way, but I'm grateful that I got to learn it this way so that I can support my clients through learning it, maybe not so the hard way that I did.
How would someone get in touch with you or find out more information about you?
Yeah, you can go on my website, www.jocelynsilva.com, JocelynSilva, or my Instagram at I am Jocelyn Silva.
Well, I appreciate you sharing your story and kind of talking about this stuff, that the things that moved you from who you were to who you are and who you're becoming. It's a beautiful story. And I appreciate the fact that you're willing to share it and share it with others to try to help them in their journey as well. So thank you.
Thank you for letting me share. And for anyone who's going through this right now, if you are the person who cheated, I want you to know that you are worthy and deserving of forgiveness, that you can forgive yourself, that you are worthy and deserving of love. You're not a monster. You're not a terrible person. You're just somebody who is on a journey that gets to learn new skills around intimacy and connection and love. And for the person who has gotten betrayed, I just want to say, speak your truth, be honest with yourself, and that develop whatever boundaries you need to develop, and that this does get better. I promise.
Faith